He said, okay.
Good evening, I'm John Lebo, I'm the chair of the City of Lake Forest Park City Council Budget and Finance Committee, and I'd like to call our meeting to order. It is 6 o'clock. Does everyone have a copy of the agenda? Need such, I think motion to adopt the agenda this evening.
So moved. Second.
Thank you. All those in favor of the adopting the agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Unanimous. Thank you. We do not, let's see. Public comments, the committee is not accepting online public comments. This portion of the agenda is set aside for the public to address the committee on agenda items. Comments are limited to 3 minutes as a time limit. Do we have any?
There are no members of the public here, so.
Thank you. So that closes any public comments. That brings us to the director's report. Director Vaughn, would you like to walk us through the June budget monitoring dashboard?
Absolutely. So I'm just gonna give our clerk a minute here. Oh, look at that. Bring that. I want to quickly remind everybody that the city council did just approve a budget amendment, but that budget amendment was approved in July. So a lot of what we're going to go over was actually that's in the yellow was addressed within that budget amendment. And so the dashboard will look a little different in July. So just that statement. So walking down the civil service commission at 95%, that is directly, it's a small portion of the general fund budget, but it is directly tied to the police hiring. So naturally, we have been doing more hiring, which would mean that it's a little bit on the higher side. In totality, it's such a small budget. I don't believe we actually amended that one, but it should be fine within the general fund. The detention and jail, that continues to be an area of watching as that expense continues to rise. And yeah, I think we amended it, and now we're, walking into this amendment in 2024. We ended up looking at what 23 was and doubling that number. So it's jail and detention costs are an area of watch, I will definitely say, and on the rise. And leave it at that. Dispatch, that is another area where we knew that was coming, that the police had to go out and have a different dispatch service. So that is being amended within this budget. And then walking down to the environmental services, that was tied to animal control. And animal control was, we had actually at the end of 2023, it was kind of an unusual, more expensive time frame. I think that was just a short period of time. And so we just need to amend to make that whole. And then walking down to the parks, in that department, we had some seasonals that we increased that salary in order to match what has actually the city has been able to hire, maintain, and have some assistance for the public works department within that department. And then walking down to the surface water utility account at 82%. That one, there was some, there's just some expenses that are trending higher as additional permits, etc., operational costs that just continue to rise. And I think that will be an ongoing discussion that we have now, continued on dashboards, in addition to just we'll naturally walk right into the budget conversations that we're having on rates and the requirements and what it's actually costing as the additional requirements from the NPDES and ecology. And should I just keep walking through, or does anybody have any questions? Okay, So I, am gonna just keep walking through. The ARPA, that is at 93% of what was budgeted at that time. The audit is at 68%. We are actually just currently, to give you an update, we are wrapping up the 21-22 audits, and so we're hopeful to, I'm gonna say this, and the second I say it, it'll, it's like the Chiefs, but the hope is to have an exit within the months of August. So we're finishing that out. And that's pretty close to completed. The Climate Action Committee, that is at 52%. And then the community programs, that is like that's our community partners. So community programs, community partners. The elections, that went slightly over, but that is an annual cost. So we shouldn't see any additional costs under the elections budget for the remainder of the year. Emergency management, that's where we pay for our NEMCO out of. Memberships, 138%. We joined the National League of Cities this year, so that was included on the budget amendment, so that will address that. Police technology and public health. So then I'm just gonna keep walking over to the revenue. So the two revenues, so the street fund, I tend to look at that as an operational standpoint. So when you tie that back to the two street maintenance and street operations, street maintenance is at 63%, street operations is at 72%. So even though the revenue is coming in just a little bit under target, what we would define as target at this time, I always compare that back to the operating side. And since both of those are under 73%, that's part of what I compare to see if there's an area of watch. And I don't believe there is. So then the surface water, that's at 81. And then the transportation capital, that was greatly tied to very large grants for the roundabout, TIV and the Wasatch grant. And I am not going to cover capital because you are going to have the pleasure of digging in a little deeper later on this agenda. So turning the page over and then walking right down into the revenue by line items. Business tax is at 77%. Construction permits is at 91%. Mark and I have been having a lot of discussions around construction and because we're starting to build budget. And so that, just giving a heads up, this has been an unusual year of just a lot of what we would define as one-time funds coming in. So even though the construction, and I'll just lump in the mechanical and the plumbing, those are at 131%. They do believe that the trends will continue, but it won't be. 23 and 24 are a little bit of a one-time anomaly, and they are not anticipating to match and exceed that growth going forward. So I'm just going to put that disclaimer in here now. And set you up to be ready for the discussions that are coming down the road. So gas tax is at 73%, and that's one that kind of fluctuates. I'm not too terribly concerned. Target is 75. It's close, so not an area of too much concern. Passport revenues is coming in at 78%, and that continues to definitely go up. Real estate excise tax 1 and 2, that is not 100% coming in as target, so that is something we are continuing to watch, and we may have to reevaluate how we budget that in the future, for our future budget. So then walking down to sales and use tax, that one I'm just going to kind of point out was always trending a little higher, and now I'm noticing that we're starting to get a little closer to the target mark. on that. And so that's something that I'm paying attention to, just especially going into a budget season. These are little tiny things that you just start seeing little indicators and you start paying attention to the trends. And then the traffic safety camera revenue, that's at 84% and, coming in above target. And that will probably be a continued discussion on, I'm guessing we will have to complete another budget amendment once we start seeing actual revenue and expenditures and have a better idea of what that is going to look like for the 178. So I'll just leave, and that's not within this original, that was a separate and we haven't started seeing that yet as far as actual tickets and so that will have to be addressed and probably prepared in a separate budget amendment that may end up being passed pretty close to the end of the year. Just to make sure that we're accurate. So we're just gonna put that out there. And I believe that concludes my budget monitoring dashboard overview. Are there any questions?
I have one. Is there any seasonality? You mentioned, for example, membership and others where you pay and therefore you see the cost hit, even though it's over, that's fine. Are you also seeing seasonal cycles with, for example, gas tax or real estate excise tax? Do more people drive in the summer?
Yeah.
Do you see higher revenue? Same thing on real estate, do you see more sales?
Yes,
spring and
yes,
summer? And so,
they tend to have seasonal swings.
so even though they may be running a little low, may that catch up, or is it hard to say at this?
I think we'll have a better, once July's over, we might start seeing that summer, so you're absolutely right. That is a great point that for the real estate excise tax on 67%, that we might start to see that trend up because we are in the summer and definitely this is more of the season of home sales and whatnot.
Okay.
So it's an area to, when we pull these out, it's just, there are areas to watch, not that I'm.
But otherwise, our sort of comparison would be 75%.
Yes. And you bring up a very good point that on some of these expenses, we pay quarterly. So when that quarterly invoice hits, it's gonna not look as fantastic on the dashboard for that quarter, especially if you're paying it ahead of that quarter, because then you still have the 2 months. But there are going to be some of those items that we will pay quarterly, so they're gonna look a little heavy on the expense, or they're gonna lag on the revenue.
Kind of like making my biannual insurance payment. Which we don't do. Any questions? Okay, thank you so much. And that will bring us to Director Paragraph and our capital improvement projects dashboard.
Yes, so in front of you have the dashboard that runs through June this year. First time that we have on the top is the Right Place Roundabout. Right now, the design is fully funded and that's moving forward and should be finished next couple of months, we'll say. Large instructions, I'm sorry. I want to point that out. We do have a shortfall of about 2.6 million. We do have a $2 million request for a loan with the Public Works Board to cover at least that portion. of it.
Excuse me, could you speak up? Can't hear you online.
We'll move to the closer.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, just one closer.
Yeah.
At some of my meetings, I use our outdoor voice. And my oldest tends to use his outdoor voice indoors. So we'll just try and remember to use our outdoor voice.
Very, when the children aren't behaving.
Yes.
That voice.
That voice, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, the dad voice, get out your dad voice.
Yeah,
I say it because I also sometimes am asked to speak a little louder, so I try to remember in public meetings to use my outdoor.
I will do my best. As I mentioned, for the construction for the roundabout, we've got about a delta of about 2.6 million. 2 million, we're hoping to cover with the Public Works Board loan, as well as $600,000 or so from TIB. They've indicated that would be fairly readily available to us. That would make up the delta that we're looking for in construction.
Before you go on, just for our benefit, would you remind us what the timing of those might be?
I know if you don't.
Yes, please.
The Public Works Board loan is around October that we'll know that. And then TIB goes before their board in November. So then they would be able to tell the story that the city went out. They told us early on, you have to have a story. You're already behind the 8 ball. You're already in trouble with us. So we need a story. The first story was that we were going to go out for this Public Works Board loan. If we receive it, then they can report in November and the 600,000 is easy. If we don't, we will scramble and come up with another story to tell.
TIB,
Yeah, for TIB
or TIB. So
and,
by the end. of
and
the
for
year.
this committee.
And for this, so by the end of the year,
Yes.
okay, so TIB is relatively quickly, or? just-
Yeah, I think at that meeting, they make that decision.
Oh, okay, so we'll just pencil in November,
Yes,
thank you.
depending, unless it falls after the date that we would meet. I'm not sure when it is.
Thank you.
So the next project that we're looking at is the L90 culvert at 31st and SR 104. For the design that is moving along. Again, we're fully funded on that project with the design. We do have a slight delta on that project for construction at this point. Again, it's a little early to tell. And keep in mind, this is the project that we're trying to coordinate with WashDOT as far as not being there in the same spot at the same time. So we're hoping that they can go in 25 and we'll go 26. If that's not the case, we will try to pivot as quickly as possibly as we can. And perhaps try to get out for 25 if that's at all possible.
I added a bolded note in here about the WASDOT timing. They are in negotiations on the Ricker property for acquisition. They will let us know by mid-August if they think they'll complete that in time for a 2025 build. And if they can't, that's when we potentially pivot and be the 2025 build. Then I also added in there, as Jeff and I discussed, that slight delta in there for the forecast includes inflation for 25 and 26. So if we went to 25, our delta gets probably down to almost 0. So
Thank you.
we want me to cover Lakefront Park.
Please.
I just threw this in here with the contract with council, just approved the 570,000 to get us through the end of the year, and just put a note in there that the total cost is 1.1 million and some change. And so once council adopts the 25-26 budget, then we will modify this to reflect the full amount and start tracking towards that. But for now, through the end of the year, it'll just be tracked against 570,000. That's been the price.
So the next project. Carol Benz covers after 11 years. We have the design complete. We are going to bid next month. We hope. No, we will. We do have a forecast of $600,000 that covers the construction administration and the construction itself. We do have a delta of 217,000 based on that estimate. That delta would be covered by capital facilities funds that we've got available.
And that's what I discussed during other discussions we've had about the capital improvement fund and a small amount coming out to help with some of these capital projects.
Questions on that?
No, I think we'll just somehow need to memorialize it.
Oh,
We got a name.
I think they're gonna be-
Covers.
I think they should be the Zank Parago Memorial
Yeah.
bin covers, yeah.
Gonna have the memorial sidewalk and I'm still here, so I don't know.
Pre-memorial.
Jeff that racket.
Do we have a naming policy?
I think we do actually, so we'll have to look it up.
There may be an opportunity.
Benny face, right?
No,
No.
mayor's not allowed to participate after that.
Okay, moving on then,
Thank you.
shall we? So 20th Avenue Culvert Repair Project, that we did put that out to bid. We did receive 2 bids earlier this week. They're being reviewed and they do come in within budget at this point. We do have some issues with, some irregularity, one of the bids, or 2 bids, I should say. or
You had,
something like
you had an issue with one of them.
that. I should say the bid documents themselves, there was a minor issue on that, so we may have to pivot a little bit and
Verify.
clarify. Yeah.
What was the issue?
It was very minor.
It was, the wrong quantity, so it just wasn't measured properly. The dollar amount will probably
The
come
wrong
out to be
quantity.
about the same, but to clarify with the contractors, it's something that should have been a lump sum and not a pound.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's just to go back and clarify that with them, the numbers stay the same. It's such a small number that they don't expect much change in that, but before you move forward with the contract, you want to make sure everybody's measuring everything the same.
So the next project we have is the 35th Avenue Drainage Project. We are finalizing some real estate issues that we have on that, the deck and whatnot. So hopefully that'll get wrapped up fairly soon. And then the final project is Great Separated Crossing. That's just moving along with 30% sign that we had authorized earlier this year.
And we're, will they, you're showing here, October, this, fall for completion of that, so we'll see the study at that.
Yeah, the idea would be that Biennial would come in, Sean Belvinus would come in and present that with Katie.
Okay, thank you.
Questions, comments?
Council members.
I guess the only thing I have is if there was other ones that were in our budget.
The dashboard.
Monitoring dashboard that might not be covered on this, this document.
Can you scroll back? Side. Oh, yeah, there, sorry.
Well, you have a big win that you didn't mention
Before,
What didn't,
the overlays. Big win.
they're done.
Yes.
Oh, they're done. Oh,
I thought that was in the last CA report. Yeah, with pictures,
Well, we could.
but that doesn't, that never goes on this dashboard.
well, we
Let's
could- the
see.
money piece hasn't
35th,
hit yet,
35th.
clearly,
Yes.
they would see that.
Asphalt over.
I was trying
So
to
the
get you to
asphalt
softball
overlay.
for a big
Yeah,
win.
there it is, right there.
Oh. Nothing.
is a win, it sounds like, so that was just since this, that budget. The 195th culvert, the SR 104 design, I don't think that was,
That's this culvert project that we discussed.
which one, was that,
L90,
that is L9.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. You suppose these are somewhat, the same.
oh,
That's
I'm
the
sorry,
shoreline
oh,
one.
the shoreline.
Okay, yeah, that's.
Oh, sorry, I'm confusing them.
Yeah, don't expect to see anything on that one until about 2028 or 29.
If
Got
you
it.
remember, they said that because of the route that has to go, that's like a 7-year project just to get through the course process.
Got it. And then obviously sort of several facilities, minor facilities projects going on, any of note?
Share your wins.
What one you're referring to?
Thinking.
Oh,
It's not done.
that's not done.
Getting there.
Working.
Yeah.
It's trending well.
Slow contractors.
Uh,
Facility project, one I can think of is we just had to, have some work done on the, generator, if you remember. the
Yeah.
Power outage
Issue,
and it
yeah.
died, and so that had to be fixed. There's nothing exciting facility projects. Even the BDA is not that exciting, but
The generator fix is quite exciting.
that
for me
is.
Personally, from an emergency management standpoint, that's nice
yes.
to have done. I'm not sure what's Lion Creek doing on here?
Where's like- Oh,
Fantastic.
Yeah, I believe that was supposed to be a restoration project, and it turned out before that we did not have to do it. So that was $100,000 that we didn't have to expend.
That's wonderful. And then it looks like we did some Safe Streets early action items there at the end. Anything with note that was done through that, or?
I think primarily just dealing with all of our requests that come in.
Okay.
I think the one note that you would remember are the readout signs, the young man who came in and presented to council. What was he called? Those were done. They worked through that, and yeah, that was several months ago. But
Okay,
I
thank you.
think if anything, that's one.
Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah, reminiscent of the Lion Creek, restoration. Is the McAleer Creek one where their sign's still up? Is that an active project and is it the city's? Up
Which
on,
location?
up Perkins Way.
That's
That's the King County, King
King
Conservation District.
Okay.
That's, there's a new one starting. Okay.
And
So
some
the
of the
old
work,
signs that they're gonna be new, I think they're going to be new signs. I think those represent.
I think they're going further up the hill this time. They came in previously with Director Bennett, presented on how they inject like the knotweed and things like that, went through that exercise. So it's continuation of that type of work there, just further up the hill. Great, thank you.
There was a grant that helped support that. So that's okay. Sure wins.
You're doing very well this evening, Director Bond.
It's a tough team.
So those positive remarks are greatly appreciated, particularly after a long day. Keep it up.
Thank you. I liked it.
Way to go.
So, thank you, Director Paraguay. I'm not seeing or hearing any other comments, so I very much appreciate the presentation and the clarity of it. That will bring us down to item number 5, old business, which is our 2025-2026 biennial budget calendar. And I think everyone has a copy. I'm going to express my disappointment that I won't be here on the 12th of September. That's the mayor's budget presentation. I will be at the Statue of Liberty that day.
Very nice.
Statue of Liberty.
You know, there's Wi-Fi at the Statue of Liberty.
And you all, you have a meeting there.
Meeting there. I'll take that under due advice.
You remember past biennials, it's been, here's the mayor's proposed
Exactly.
budget, take it home, read it, and we'll
And then we'll
discuss at
talk.
the next meeting.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
not much.
You'll get the receipt of it.
You'll receive it electronically in addition to physically, those who request a physical copy, you will get a physical binder. So,
So while I'm on the ferry or climbing the stairs, I can look at it. On
yes, absolutely. Any downtime will be at your fingertips.
We could fit it, we could overnight one to you, carry it.
That's very generous, but I don't think I want to extend that much money.
Might be a budget constraint, for sure.
That's true.
I'll pay for it if you carry it.
The word that-
Thank you, I will take those under consideration and give them proper. Due diligence, thank you.
Okay,
Any comments, you, Director Bond, do you want
So-
to?
actually, this is pretty much the same that we walked through at the, was it a work session? It was a previous work session, and so last week. Easy. It's been a long week. So clearly I keep trying to find the win, so. There's been a lot of work going on and there's just, it's pretty much the same. I don't think actually there's any change in here that has been proposed.
The piece of paper I have is different because 14th is dropped off.
Yeah,
Oh.
the later, yeah, at the end of the packet.
So honestly, we could walk into, we could walk into the budget, we could go to the overview and it's at the end. The same calendar is screenshotted as the final piece in that, but I figured that I would give a little bit of a bigger copy. Everybody's, in case it didn't show up there. If that would be all right.
Now, when you say a larger copy, you just physically a larger copy or?
Yeah, it's just a copy so that everybody can have one in hand tonight. But
That's what's at the end of your budget 101 presentation.
correct, it's actually in that presentation in addition. The correct budget calendar.
Here it comes. There you go.
Because that's so large.
Perfect.
So, thank you for the quick pivot. So, walking through this, pretty much the same. Today, we're gonna do a budget 101, just the budget process, and we're gonna kind of walk through what to expect. So a little bit more detail than just walking through this calendar, but this calendar is the framework for the budget 101 on all the dates. So make sure that when you're looking at your calendars, that you're using this budget calendar to put everything into your personal or however you organize each meeting, because there are some different meetings, and I want to point out, even walking into the first meeting in August, which is the 5th, that's a Monday. And so I tried to do anything unique as in italics. And this year we have made the decision collectively to not put the community partners on a council meeting evening, so that there can be a more of a conversation after they give their presentations, and then broke it up into two groups, because it did end up being quite a long meeting during a council meeting. So we broke it up to 2 separate meetings, and then we'll have half of the community partners come in on the 5th and the other half come in on the 12th. And then in between there, on August 8th, during that work session, we'll go over the revenue and expenditures, the year-end projections for 23 and 24. And why that's important is because that will be the information that we lock in and use to walk into our next budget season, which will be the 25-26. So that information gives us projected year-end balances for our funds. And so that information will be important to discuss prior to walking in to all of the other information. On August 19th, that Monday alone, we are going to have the capital improvement projects. So that meeting alone will just be on the capital improvement projects and where we think that schedule is going. And then on walking into September, the 12th, typically on that Thursday, the mayor's proposed budget, that is simply handed over to city council members. And I'm not sure exactly how we've done that in the past. Have we given that out and then held posting it until like Monday so that the council members can review it? Or have we posted, given it out, posted it the exact same?
Yeah.
Okay. So for public, access. So we will do that, and then walking down, so the September 19th, that's when we'll start just digging in. We'll just immediately get into the revenue projections, so we'll walk through all of the revenues. And then it seemed like quite a bit, which it does mean more meetings, but I think it will be more digestible on the information overload, especially with new council members, that we do the department presentations on 2 different evenings and not all at once, because there is a lot to take in. So those two that will be Monday, September 23rd, and then it will be again, on the 26th. So then going down to the 30th. That Monday, that, historically, after all of the information has been presented that's in the preliminary budget, the mayor's preliminary budget, at that point, we will have a public comment, and then the council, well, the budget committee, which will exist of the entire council, will start the conversations of the comments, the deliberation, and their thoughts after all of the information has been provided. And historically, that's worked extremely well. And then this is where we have built in quite a few meetings. And if they're needed, we'll have them. If, if we do find that there's an agreement amongst what was presented, and I've actually never been in a budget that was just, they get tweaked and a couple things get added or adjusted with additional information. That happens too. Sometimes we present this and we put it together very early and then we have better information the later we go. So we need to true it up basically, because we want to adopt the budget with the best knowledge we have. And so some of those will occur, and then, so that is basically, all of October. So there's, 3 separate meetings for just continued deliberations and recommendations for the council and the mayor to all have, and staff to all have conversations to make this budget the best budget it can be for the city. And then we walk into public hearings, and that's where we'll have public hearings on property tax, the sewer rate, the surface water rate, any budget related item. The user fees will come as a resolution. I know there's more, but I can't think of it at the moment. There's quite a few that gets adopted with the actual ordinance. The budget ordinance and the salary schedule that gets adopted traditionally with it. And then on November 7th, I have that italicized because that will be our final public hearing on the property tax and the budget related items. And that is the anticipated adoption date for the actual budget. Building in if some comment is made where the city does need to hit a pause button and pivot on that and not adopt on that evening, that the city has plenty of time to set up another meeting, knowing that the mayor is not going to be available the next week. We could set a special meeting where we normally have our budget, finance, or come up with a plan at that time. So we have a contingency plan, is the point. And I believe that concludes my overview of the draft budget calendar. And historically, once it's agreed upon, we do actually take this into a council meeting and is it approve it by motion? Adopt it by motion? Okay. And that's historically, and then we make sure that we news flash it and we get the information out to as many people publicly so that they can participate as part of our process.
Good, thank you. Are there any comments or questions?
Just a clarifying question. At what point is the entire council part of the budget committee? Do you know when that happens? When we,
October.
that's in October.
No, it's before that.
It's
That'd be before that for the,
for according to the governance manual, it's the budget when you have deliberations. When you have deliberations, it's when you become the full council.
yeah, that's interesting. Historically,
Started
We've done it much
Started
earlier.
June, I think, yeah, that's a big.
Might need to go back and look at it, just make it. Says October.
Yeah,
But it-
that was
but
an
it-
easy question.
But
But we're,
the comment it would be, it's when we start our deliberation, that we, the full council is part of that budget deliberation. So the presentations leading up to it are optional if you're not part of the budget committee. But otherwise, the regular presentation, full council is there.
I would
It's not.
highly recommend,
Yeah.
I'm just gonna, that might be what our governance manual states. But I would highly recommend, especially new council members that haven't been through this process. This calendar and these meetings were set to help help everybody, and it's not just council members, it's community members, it's all of staff, it's each department has their own unique assignments, challenges that they're up against. Some of us share similar challenges and some of us don't share similar challenges. And so this is the point at which you get to walk through and be very informed on community partners. And we try to give you all of the information prior to asking the entire council to walk into the recommendations and deliberations to make sure that you go in completely informed.
So I do think that Matt is right, though. So, I mean, everybody should be here beginning August 5th on, but as far as them acting as a body and making decisions and deliberations, that is October, and then it is the full council. Because there's no decisions, no deliberations going on ahead of that time. So I think technically for the governance manual, we still need it, but yes, we highly encourage that full participation August 5th on.
It's actually just how you wanna notice the meeting, it's whether or not you wanna call it a budget finance or the city council. Meeting. Either way is. Hey, there's question forum too, if it's a city council, meeting, so.
With that in mind, though, I mean, for example, where we do have a budget finance committee on the 17th, but it would seem more appropriate that that's identified as a full council. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, so maybe we can just review those to make sure that we clarify so that we do notice them, that they're recognized as full council. Point well taken, and also I'm delighted that this council will give all these meetings their full attention. Unless they're in the statute. Councilmember Fred.
Thank you. And yeah, thanks very much for a very clear presentation. I just had a procedural question. So on the 5th and 12th of August, the community partners are going to give the presentations. How are they notified that they're going to be giving the presentations? Have they already been notified?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, they have. Historically, Corey has always been their contact for communications, invoicing. And so that's how we actually started communicating with them when we thought the date would be the 8th. And so we had to do a little bit of a change there, giving them some, and so she has been communicating, they have been communicated with. And she said that I'll connect with her to make sure that I know which community partners are going on the first meeting versus the second, because she said when we discussed this, she didn't know at that time.
And the reason I'm asking the question is, what about potential new community partners?
They are welcome to, I think we just need to be contacted
Yeah, I mean, if you know of somebody, yeah, we want to be contacted. It's like we have a potential new contact, new community member coming through the chief of discussion from Rotary. Their group provides support to families dealing with fentanyl. And so we have funds that would absolutely be able to help fund that type of a program. And so I encouraged him to have her come and speak to the council about what they do and what their needs might be and see if it's something we could support. So
they should contact you or Corey?
Both.
Okay,
That would be fine. And this year, I will just say internally, we've even created a template form. Because we do know of that, potential community partner, and then the Historical Society who presented to, city council, I believe it was this last month. So we do know that there's some different ones, so this year than we have historically had previously. So therefore, internally, we decided to create just a quick little template to also, we're gonna ask every community partner to provide just a formal ask of what the financial ask is. So, that will be an additional, something kind of new. It's just a one page. It's not supposed to be challenging at all. Just so it is very clear on what they present and then what financially they're asking. So we keep it very straightforward.
thank you.
So in that regard, when we give money to the city to these community organizations, remind me, do we have a desire or request that they provide some sort of performance measure of the money that we give?
So, most of it, or not most, when they do provide invoices, they, as part of what is stated within their contract, they're providing the information that has been requested out of that contract in those invoices as back.
What I'm thinking of is sort of performance measures. We serve this many people.
Yeah.
We
Yes.
said we were going to do this with your money. Here, let me show you what we did with it.
Yeah, so at the last council meeting, Deputy Mayor Bodie asked about the homeless authority and how our dollars have been spent. And I do have that from them. And so I think one thing as we discuss it with the community partners, you may want to ask them that they come in at the end of their first year to council and do a presentation on numbers, or if that's something you want to see. Otherwise, they can just submit a report and we can bring it to council.
I think that's for a good discussion with the council members. I would encourage, though, that when they're presenting, that they might talk about how they measure their performance with the money that we provide. Just so that that can get teed out. So coming back, whether it's a report or a presentation, I think is a good discussion. But it's useful for everyone to say, we requested this money to serve so many people or purchase equipment, and here's what we've done with your money. We're very proud of that.
And they're used to that because most of them apply for CDBG dollars. And when you do that, you have to tell them up front how much you're requesting, what you expect to serve, population, et cetera, numbers. So yeah, we can ask that up.
Or could you put it on your form?
What?
You could put that on your form.
That's true.
Oh,
As one of the things that they should talk about is how would they measure the performance?
And that we will be asking for that at the end of the year, maybe. So.
Yeah.
So.
It's always better when they know what to expect, because then they can hit the target. Kind of like performance reviews.
Yeah. We all love those.
So that was a discussion about the our final budget calendar. Are there any comments or additional questions? Councilmember?
I'm assuming that these additional special meetings will get on kind of that, our internal meetings calendar after we approve it?
Yeah.
Is that when we'll see it? Okay. Good.
Thank you for that, and then that will bring us over to item 6, the new business and overview of the budget process. And I think you have some presentation. Do you have any handouts you want to share with us?
I do have a presentation, and this just always seems to, it is in the presentation, but I made sure to also give you just a handout of it, and it's the financial organization chart, the fund structure. And this is basically the outline of how the city budgets. And so I refer back to this often. And so I just thought that when we were having an earlier discussion this year, it was brought up, and so here it is. It was brought up, and so I just made sure it was included in the presentation, but just that everybody has this physically in hand, separate from the presentation. And it is page 16 on the actual budget that is on the website. So it's already publicly posted.
Maybe I missed it just because I came late. No, I got that. Is there a copy of your presentation? It's good.
PowerPoint.
Oh.
PowerPoint, so that if you have PowerPoint presentations, it would be good to have paper copies.
Absolutely. I only made one for myself, which I would be happy to give you, even though it has my name.
But it will be shared later, or
I mean, it's in the packet.
It is in the packet.
it is, okay, so I should
Yes.
just print it out. And I looked at it.
It's already yes, it was posted
Yes.
yesterday.
Okay, thank you.
And that's noted in, when we do presentations, I'll make sure they're printed.
Printed,
So walking into the overview, this conversation will probably sound very familiar since we just walked through the budget calendar. But basically the overview is the city does provide an outline for the future levels of service and the legislative priorities. It acts as a legal document to provide local government officials the authority to incur obligations and pay expenses. So basically, without a budget, the city, those funds have to be allocated in order for cities to pay invoices. If funds are not allocated, or they greatly exceed the fund level, not just the line item, like when we go over on a line item, that's not what we're talking about here, because we adopted the fund level. And the fund level, I'm going to tie back to the financial organization chart. That is where you can find your fund level. And it allocates resources amongst departments and controls how much each department can spend during the biennium. Unless we walk into a budget amendment, which we do because every single budget is a living document. So the budget process, this is a straight snippet out of our current budget. So walking through, first, we have a call letter that the mayor puts out saying, this is our timeline for the budget. It's budget time, and we need all departments to put their budgets together. Internally in the finance department, we create budget sheets. We provide history of the actuals, and then what we're looking for in the future budget of 25 and 26. So then the call for budget, and then we are actually at this point right now where finance is putting the whole budget together from the revenues and the expenditures, and then administration, being myself, Bill, and the mayor, will sit down with each department head and make sure that what's entered in those budgets is truly the need, and have the conversations if something has changed, something additional is needed, or I mean, I pay attention to the opposite too. If there's a swing on asking for less, being able to defend that why, in order to know that if we do reduce something, that is again the true need. And that so something doesn't get missed, that we could have prevented. So then that's when the community partners and departments will present to the Budget and Finance Committee, and that term's being used as council. Budget and Finance Committee under budget terms being the entire council. The community partners present, so actually that's gonna switch this year. So community partners are going, and then we will do the department presentations. The mayor introduces the budget proposal to city council. We will pass that over the first meeting in September. Then walking into October, that is where the Budget and Finance Committee considers the mayor's proposal and starts the deliberations, recommendations, within. Then it walks into the legislation, being introduced. That's what that means is the property tax and the budget hearings, and all of those items that go into putting the budget together. And so we'll have public hearings held on that, and then the Budget and Finance Committee, any changes that need to be made in order from, that come out of the public hearing during the process of deliberation, that we make sure that all of those are holistically included in order to present the final budget that is then adopted in November. So during the spring, this council had a retreat to identify the city's priorities to align. And during that council retreat, what I was partially paying attention to is how the priorities were going to look into what we were walking into with our 25-26 budget. So staff budget objective discussions. So basically at leadership team meetings, I've been a broken record stating, budget's coming. Please put it together. My staff is open to you. And we've been working together in order to get all of the information put together. Update any necessary city plans and or policies. And that's just a time frame. The official call to the budget occurred at the beginning of June. And then the budget estimates start being developed by, I will say, department teams, because it's not always just the director that puts it together. Often the director is the one that puts it together, but sometimes it definitely takes a team to put it and give us the best information. So the budget process during the summer, again, the budget estimates, the developed and completed by department directors and their teams. The finance department, that's the step we're in right now, is I am taking all of the information from all of the spreadsheets and trying to put it together. And make sure that we have all of the pieces of the puzzle and revenues, expenditures from all departments. And then finance and administration, we would define that as build the budget. So that's, we put it together, we compare them, the estimates, the request, the administration reviews, and we evaluate. So anytime that a department asks for what we would define as a program enhancement or change form, I'm going to tie this back to during the budget, or not the budget retreat, excuse me, the council retreat. A GIS person, staff was brought up. So there is a request for that position. That being said, because that's outside of what currently exists within our budget, it's asking, we're enhancing something, we're changing something. And so that's just an example of a program enhancement and change form. So then present the year-end revenue and expenditure projections for the current. That will happen at the beginning of August at the August 8th meeting. And then we work towards the finalization of the mayor's preliminary city budget, which will be presented to council on September 12th at the first council meeting. Then we walk into fall, and this is definitely where the budget season starts to get a little busier. The mayor presents the preliminary budget, and we walk through the detailed department presentations. City council starts adding in all of the recommendations and deliberations. We prepare the proposed city biennial budget with agreed upon revisions. So any change that's in there that's being requested from, council members that's agreed upon, amongst the entire group. Those end up being added in, and any form of, I stated, sometimes things change as we get more information. You know, we put in a number, I'll just use an example, estimated for like healthcare increases. And then once we get the actual, healthcare is going to increase under these plans, X amount %, then we can true that up, whichever way it goes, higher or lower. So we're trying to be as accurate as possible, but build a budget with the information we had, and then we hone it in to be very specific together as partners. And then we walk into public hearings, which are the property tax, the utility rate increases. So we'll be discussing the surface water rate and the sewer rate, the user fee schedule, and any other budget related item. The property tax, we're gonna be also discussing property tax with that increase, and we will need to then, walking down a bullet point, we will need to adopt the property tax levies and file that with King County by, the deadline on that is November 30th. Then we need to adopt the budget by ordinance and any other budget related item and resolution. And the goal for us internally has always been November. The absolute hard deadline to pass a budget is December 31st. And
Councilmember Curtin.
Sorry, I didn't mean to break your flow, but the tax levy adoption, that's the 1% that's council mandated, right?
that is correct. So when we, yes, so when we talk about adopt property tax levies and file with King County, we are discussing only on that line item the increase of the additional 1%. And then the other factors that play into that, which are like new construction, and there's some other pieces that are incorporated within the property tax, that ordinance.
Thanks.
So then walking to the next slide, this is the one where we have, I gave the special handout in order to have. And this is the financial organization chart, the fund structures. And this, to me, when you're trying to give an overview of how a city budgets, this is a very, I think, effective visual. So anything in a square, and you'll have the little note in the bottom left there. Anything in a square represents what we call a major fund. And anything in a circle represents what we call a non-major fund. Sometimes we call it a sub-fund. And if I use the term rolling, what that means is it's literally taking that circle fund and putting it up with the big square fund. So if that's kind of a, sometimes I don't catch myself on my terminology, and that is like a finance term that we use internally, saying what fund rolls into the other. And so if I say that, then you will know that I'm referring to a sub fund being able to roll into a major fund. Now, that being said, I'm just gonna go to using actually the special revenue fund. So like the street fund, if I said the transportation benefit district is going to roll into the street fund, that would be incorrect and could not occur because they are both major funds and have to fully stand alone. So the squares versus the circles, it seems very simplistic, but when we get into all of the budgeting, this little template of an outline, when we start talking about funds, and I will also say that this is where the color of money, this is one of those where that we use that term, the color of money, on things that can support each other versus not support each other. It's helpful when you have something like this in front of you to know that your enterprise funds cannot then support, something they're not allowed to support, like going back to pay for police services in the general fund. That would not, absolutely not be allowed. So there's rules around it, but this visual just seems to be straightforward and a very easy way to display the information.
Fund numbers?
Oh, we can add them.
That would be helpful. And then if there is like, sort of like a restrictive, like for where read one goes and where read two goes, it'd be kind of nice if that's a sort of another layer to this visual that we could, maybe a second one that's like a little bit more complex. Cause that kind of helps me, cause I know that some are like mostly funded by the read one. That would be lovely.
So I think to add to this, I would be absolutely okay with adding fund numbers. If we start getting into more detail, it quickly loses its simplicity. That being said, I'll have to think on how we could maybe create a more detailed, like have,
Different version.
yes. But let me, if we, you can let me think on that.
That would be helpful in both categories, both the numbers and sort of that this fund can fund that fund, but only that. Now I'm taking away the circles mean because they can roll.
Thank you for the win. And sometimes it's just if you simplify, it seems, but you'll remember it. If you just simplify it, it just becomes manageable and memorable to, you know, and the more we talk about it, it will become a little bit like a broken record. But it's, that'll be good during budget season.
Yeah, adding the fund numbers will be, it'll be simple. It's helpful.
Absolutely, we can do that.
Consistent, so that.
But also if there's a way to help us understand that funds can only go in certain places. Useful because you will bring that up and you'll get some looks like, oh yeah, that's right. Councilmember Furman.
Thanks for doing that because it makes it a lot more clear. And is it also the case that when we say that this fund can borrow money from another fund and pay back with interest, that's the circle square relationship?
No, that circle square relationship is, so that's where we're adopting a resolution saying this fund cannot pay for the intended use that you're, like our interfund loan that we recently did for the purchase of the lakefront property.
Right.
Due to more of a, it wasn't that we didn't have the funds, it was that they weren't, we had to fund and then they had to be reimbursed. It was a timing issue on the revenue coming in. So what happens there, when you do an interfund loan, that is the exception to the rule, but that fund cannot borrow. 106, the strategic opportunity to pay for the park could not borrow from the sewer capital. The sewer capital can only pay for sewer and sewer capital. So, but if you establish an interfund loan, at that point, it can pay. But the caveat back is that it has to pay interest like you are doing a true loan of money.
Right.
Just think of it, if you didn't have the money to pay for a car and you went out and bought a car, you would be paying interest on that portion of money that you were asking for the loan. And that's the same within this, within your budget structure.
Right. So even though it's our own money, it's almost like a penalty we pay for the privilege of doing that.
It's restricted. You have restricted dollars, and the only way you can do it by state law is to pay that fund interest back.
Correct.
So the loan.
Thanks.
And that,
And that is the interest. What is the interest based off of? Is that
well, we
locked to something?
Well, we used to always tie it, not used to, we've always tied it to the LGIP. That being said, the LGIP is at like 5% right now. So to borrow money from yourself, when previously, I mean, when I first started in local government, I think it was like 0.015%. It was very, very low. And so the LGIP, when you are borrowing money now, you are paying the current rate that the LGIP is paying on your money. And so that is definitely of note, and it's of an actual expense. It's to, not incentivize interfund loans, it's to deter from that practice, but sometimes that is your option in order, like where we were at with the lakefront property. We were receiving those grant, I think it was the 2 state grants that we then ended up on a reimbursement basis. And that was why, knowing that we had it fully funded, but it was a timing issue on cash flow.
No, I
Another,
think that does it for me for right now. I just understand where that percentage is from.
and we're back to the budget calendar. So I think, that has already been, discussed, and so that, at this time, concludes my presentation. Are there any additional questions?
Good job.
Thank you. As always, it's quite a process and we're looking forward to it. It's an important function of the city. And so we're all lucky to have such a terrific administration, and our council members will be very attentive.
Jeff was online.
Councilmember Saunders, do you have any questions?
No, thank you.
You're good. Okay. With that, I don't think we have any more business, and motion to adjourn.
Second.
I think we are adjourned.